What if the royal victim we all believed in was actually the one who made someone else cry? In a revelation that's sending shockwaves through the UK, Kate Middleton has broken her silence and dropped a bombshell that flips the entire Meghan Markle narrative on its head. She says the story told to Oprah was a lie, that it wasn't her who made Meghan cry before the royal wedding, but the other way around. And now, with public trust, royal reputations, and years of silence at stake, the truth is finally surfacing. This is not just about tears, it's about manipulation, image, and the most dramatic royal reversal in years. Stay with us. What happens when the royal known for grace and silence finally speaks and drops a truth bomb that rewrites everything the world thought it knew? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. For years, the infamous incident known as Crygate has been one of the most hotly debated and emotionally loaded chapters in the war between the Windsors and the Sussexes. It began with one sentence, quietly inserted into Meghan Markle's now legendary 2021 interview with Oprah Winfrey: "Kate made me cry." That claim sent shockwaves through the British public and international media. The woman once celebrated for her composure and diplomacy, Catherine, Princess of Wales, was, in an instant, cast as the cold, cruel enforcer of royal rigidity who pushed a tearful bride to her breaking point. The world, hungry for drama and division, took sides. Meghan, the American outsider, was painted as a sympathetic victim of a heartless institution. Kate, the royal insider, was cast as the embodiment of quiet cruelty hiding behind polished smiles and pearl earrings. The divide between the two women symbolized something much bigger than a wedding disagreement. It became the fault line of modern monarchy. British versus American. Tradition versus individuality. Graceful silence versus speaking your truth. But now, 3 years later, the narrative has ruptured. Kate Middleton has broken her silence, and what she has revealed has stunned the nation. With firm conviction and trembling precision, the Princess of Wales has finally told her side of the story. In a statement that took palace aides, royal watchers, and global media by surprise, Kate revealed that it was she who was brought to tears during the tense pre-wedding days, not Meghan. And not only did Meghan reverse the truth in her Oprah interview, Kate says she did so deliberately, using that narrative to bolster her own sympathy with the global audience and twist the knife into the monarchy that she had already decided to leave behind. This revelation is more than a bombshell. It's a cultural correction. It challenges not only Meghan's credibility but also the very story that shaped the Sussexes' public image and their justification for stepping back from royal life. But why now? Why did Kate stay silent for so long? And what finally pushed her to speak out? The answer, insiders say, is not simple. It lies in years of internal palace conflict, emotional strain, and a growing recognition within the institution that silence is no longer protection, it is permission. That to allow falsehoods to dominate the narrative is to surrender the moral ground that the monarchy has tried so desperately to maintain. Kate, by all accounts, didn't want to be the center of this fight. She has long upheld Queen Elizabeth's rule of restraint: never complain, never explain. But as the attacks from Montecito continued and the public sympathy for Meghan hardened into unchallenged conviction, Kate's silence began to feel like a kind of guilt. And in recent months, with the memory of the late Queen still fresh and King Charles attempting to modernize the royal image, advisors quietly urged Kate to reclaim her truth, not to attack Meghan, but to restore balance to the story. What followed was a carefully coordinated disclosure, an interview with a respected journalist, heavily vetted by palace legal teams, and timed to coincide with new public engagements that positioned Kate not as a victim, but as a poised, powerful future queen who had simply had enough of being misunderstood. In her own words, delivered with composure and, some say, quiet fury, Kate said, "I was deeply hurt. What happened that week before the wedding, it broke me in a way I didn't expect. But I chose to stay silent because I didn't want to make things worse for the family. I never imagined that silence would be used against me." The response was immediate and seismic. Within minutes of the interview's release, social media lit up. Hashtags like #Kate tells the truth and #Meghan lied began trending. News anchors scrambled to rewrite scripts. Radio call-in shows were flooded with messages of support. Even media figures who had previously leaned pro-Sussex paused to reconsider. Was the narrative we accepted in 2021 incomplete, or worse, manipulated? To understand the impact of this moment, we must revisit the origins of Crygate. According to Meghan's Oprah interview, the incident happened days before her wedding to Prince Harry in May 2018. The issue was reportedly about bridesmaid dresses, specifically the one worn by Princess Charlotte. Meghan claimed that Kate confronted her, made her cry, and then later apologized by sending flowers. The implication was clear that Meghan, in one of the most stressful weeks of her life, had been made to feel small by a woman the world revered. That moment became emblematic of the cruelty Meghan said she faced behind palace doors. It was a human moment, deeply relatable, and it helped millions of viewers empathize with her experience. The statement may have lasted less than 2 minutes, but its effects rippled outward for years. Now, according to Kate, that story was reversed. Insiders close to the princess say that Kate tried everything she could to smooth things over after Meghan's alleged outburst. That Meghan had been harsh with the dressmakers, reduced a staff member to tears, and confronted Kate with a level of aggression that shocked her. That after the exchange, Kate left in tears, not because she was fragile, but because the stress, the tension, and the hostility finally broke through the royal mask. Even more damning, sources say Kate's team considered publicly correcting the record at the time, but were blocked by senior royal aides who feared fueling the fire. Let it go, she was reportedly told. It's just one sentence. The institution must rise above it. But that one sentence, as it turns out, had the power to reshape public perception. It became a cornerstone in Meghan's campaign of emotional authenticity, and it left Kate to carry the weight of a falsehood she never deserved. What does it mean when the most trusted woman in the royal family tells you she's been misrepresented intentionally and globally? It means we must revisit everything, not just Crygate, but the broader saga of the Sussexes' departure, their narrative of victimhood, and the role of silence in allowing falsehoods to take root. Kate's revelation is not just a statement. It is a challenge to the public, to the press, and to the palace. It says, don't mistake dignity for weakness. Don't assume that the woman who smiles through it all hasn't been privately enduring more than you can imagine. It also marks a turning point in the battle for public sympathy. For years, Meghan held the advantage. Her interviews were dramatic, emotionally charged, and globally broadcast. Kate, in contrast, said nothing. She showed up. She worked. She waved. And she endured. But now that she has spoken, the tables may be turning. The woman who once chose silence now stands at the center of a truth-telling moment that could reshape the monarchy's public image. The implications of this reversal are enormous. If Meghan lied about Crygate, what else was distorted? What other stories, told in stylized documentaries or best-selling memoirs, deserve re-examination? And most critically, what does this mean for the trust the public placed in her narrative? Some will say Kate is too late, that the damage has been done, that her silence in 2021 allowed a false story to become canon. But others will say that her timing is impeccable, that her words carry more weight precisely because she waited, because she did not rush to defend herself, because when she finally spoke, she did so with precision, not drama. This video will take you deep into that journey. We will break down the entire Crygate timeline, analyze the media spin from both sides, share leaked accounts from insiders who were present during the infamous confrontation, explore why the palace stayed silent for so long and why that silence is now being replaced with strategic transparency. We'll look at how this moment is shifting public opinion, and we'll ask the difficult but necessary questions about who we choose to believe and why. Because in the war of words between two of the most famous women in the world, one thing is now certain: only one of them has finally spoken her truth. It began with a simple anecdote, a single sentence spoken quietly, almost casually, by Meghan Markle in her explosive March 2021 interview with Oprah Winfrey. The world was watching. Millions were leaning in. And then it dropped, like a stone into calm water. Kate made me cry. With those 4 words, a firestorm was ignited. The so-called Crygate scandal was born. Not just as a fleeting detail in a broader discussion of royal life, but as a symbol of emotional injustice, institutional cruelty, and the unraveling of relationships once assumed to be unbreakable. The comment wasn't just sensational, it was strategically placed. Oprah had asked Meghan about her experience joining the royal family and dealing with tabloid stories. One of the most prominent rumors circulating prior to the 2018 royal wedding had been that Meghan had made Kate cry over a disagreement about flower girl dresses. Meghan, with a composed expression and a measured tone, calmly corrected the narrative. "No," she said, "the reverse happened." Then she added, And I don't say that to be disparaging about anyone, because it was a really hard week of the wedding. The audience, primed to believe in Meghan's vulnerability and truth-telling tone, accepted it almost immediately. Kate, who had long been characterized as the dutiful, traditional, composed royal wife, suddenly found herself rebranded, at least in that moment, as the antagonist. Meghan's revelation carried weight, not because it was shouted, but because it was whispered. This moment was not simply a revelation about tears, it was the opening volley in a wider recontextualization of royal life. Meghan's narrative suggested a family more focused on image than compassion. The anecdote about Kate, in particular, was designed to reflect the emotional isolation she claimed to endure inside the royal system. It was subtle, precise, and devastating in its effectiveness. Within hours of the interview airing, media around the world exploded with headlines. Kate made Meghan cry, Duchess of Tears, bridal breakdown at the palace. Social media erupted into a battlefield. Supporters of Meghan viewed her story as confirmation of what they had long suspected. That behind the carefully curated image of the royal family was a web of passive-aggressive cruelty. For Kate, the silence that followed was deafening. There was no response from Kensington Palace. No clarification from royal spokespeople. No statement from Kate or William. The story was allowed to stand, unchallenged, for months. In an institution where discretion is often mistaken for guilt, many interpreted the palace's silence as confirmation. But how did we get here? What really happened in the lead-up to the wedding? And how did an internal, emotional disagreement between two women morph into an international media frenzy that still dominates royal headlines years later? According to numerous insiders who have since spoken off the record, the incident in question took place during the final fittings for the royal wedding in May 2018. The issue, they claim, revolved around Princess Charlotte's bridesmaid dress. There were logistical and aesthetic concerns. The dress didn't fit properly, alterations were running behind schedule, and there were disagreements over whether tights should be worn, apparently a sticking point between Kate and Meghan. One source close to the palace at the time described the scene as tense, emotionally charged, and overwhelmed with wedding pressure. Meghan, eager to assert her vision for the event, reportedly clashed with Kate, who was trying to balance tradition, the preferences of her own children, and last-minute demands from a complex royal operation. What happened next has become the subject of relentless speculation. Some aides say Kate was firm but polite, and it was Meghan who escalated the exchange. Others claim the dispute never should have happened, and that miscommunication from assistants led to misunderstandings. Still others suggest Meghan was under immense pressure, dealing with her father's media scandal, wedding logistics, and the looming presence of a skeptical public, and lashed out under that pressure. Regardless of who started it, several people in the room that day later said that Kate left the meeting visibly upset. She reportedly returned home and was comforted by Prince William. According to multiple insider reports, Meghan did, in fact, send flowers and a handwritten apology note to Kate afterward. That gesture, once cited as evidence of goodwill by Meghan, was interpreted by the palace as an acknowledgement of wrongdoing, not the other way around. But by the time Meghan's version aired during the Oprah interview, the roles had reversed. The narrative was flipped with surgical precision. Suddenly, it was Kate who needed to apologize. Meghan who needed compassion. And the royal family, by implication, became the enablers of emotional abuse. This wasn't just a personal dispute. It was a public relations earthquake. Royal watchers began to pick apart every moment between the two duchesses captured by photographers before and after the wedding. Old footage was re-examined. Public engagements between Kate and Meghan, once viewed as stiff but cordial, were now interpreted through a new lens of suspicion. Smiles were labeled fake. Glances were turned into memes. Entire articles were written on the body language of two women who, it turns out, had never truly bonded. The tabloids seized on the story with merciless efficiency. For weeks after the Oprah interview, newsstands were stacked with competing narratives. Some portrayed Kate as steely, silent, humiliated, but gracious. Others lauded Meghan for speaking her truth, finally pulling the curtain back on what royal life really meant. Television panels debated the story with theatrical intensity, pitting royalists against Republicans, traditionalists against modernists. Yet through it all, Kate remained silent. That silence, though consistent with royal tradition, came at a steep cost. The public interpreted it however they wanted. For Meghan's supporters, it was proof of guilt. For Kate's defenders, it was seen as dignified restraint. but few neutral observers gave Kate the benefit of the doubt. She had become a passive character in someone else's story. Palace aides later admitted they were caught off guard by how impactful the story had become. They believed it would be a small detail in a much larger interview. They underestimated how starved the world was for emotional authenticity, and how damaging that need could be when used strategically. And so, for 3 years, Crygate remained an unresolved chapter. A small but potent scar in the narrative of two duchesses who once stood side by side, but now represented two sides of a war that neither had fully declared. Until now, Kate's recent decision to publicly set the record straight has reopened the Crygate file, not as a passing anecdote, but as a pivotal turning point in the modern royal saga. Her version of the story, quietly held for years, buried under the weight of protocol, has finally emerged. And its emergence forces us to re-examine everything we thought we knew about that wedding week, about that exchange, and about the women at the center of it all. This isn't merely about who cried and why. It's about how truth is told, who gets to tell it, and what happens when silence is mistaken for surrender. The origin of Crygate is no longer just a footnote in the Sussex saga. It is now a battle over narrative itself. For years, what actually happened behind the closed doors of Kensington Palace before Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's royal wedding remained tightly under wraps. Whispers circulated. Contradictory leaks emerged. But no one from the royal household spoke officially, and none of the principals involved gave direct statements until now. Kate Middleton's recent statement has shattered the veil of ambiguity. Her version of events not only contradicts Meghan's public claim, but is now backed by a growing chorus of palace insiders, aides, and witnesses who were either present during the incident or were privy to the aftermath. Their testimonies, some anonymous, others quietly verified by reporters close to the palace, paint a very different picture than the one the world came to accept in 2021. Let's return to that fateful week in May 2018. With the eyes of the world preparing to watch a real-life fairy tale unfold, tensions inside the palace were reaching boiling point. Meghan, under increasing pressure due to her father Thomas Markle's erratic behavior in the media, was reportedly in a highly stressed and emotional state. Her demands regarding the wedding's aesthetics, logistics, and last-minute adjustments were, according to multiple staffers, intense and unrelenting. The issue at the center of the Crygate dispute was simple in concept, but explosive in context. Princess Charlotte's bridesmaid dress. There had already been issues with the sizing, and the dresses needed additional tailoring. Time was running short. The fittings were rushed. And Meghan, allegedly fixated on specific details, insisted that certain changes be made immediately. Kate, mindful of protocol and her daughter's comfort, reportedly raised concerns. According to one senior royal aide, the moment turned sour when Meghan allegedly snapped at a staffer who expressed doubt about whether the changes could be completed on time. Kate stepped in, reportedly trying to mediate and protect the staff member, only to become the target of Meghan's frustration. While no one has disclosed the exact words used, those present suggest the exchange was sharp, deeply uncomfortable, and ended with Kate leaving in tears. She was holding it together as best as she could, said one person familiar with the scene. But it was clear she was overwhelmed, both by the moment and by the feeling that she was being steamrolled in an environment she'd always tried to navigate with kindness and restraint. That sentiment is echoed by another insider, a stylist involved with fittings who remained anonymous but spoke to a respected UK outlet. There was pressure on both sides, but Kate was always polite, always collaborative. Meghan, not so much. In the hours that followed, palace corridors buzzed with shock. Not because arguments before weddings are rare, everyone expected nerves, but because of how out of character the event seemed. Kate, normally reserved and unflappable, was visibly distraught. Meghan, described as unapologetic in the moment, carried on with other tasks without acknowledging them. The next day, a courier arrived at Kensington Palace. A small bouquet of flowers and a handwritten note were delivered to Kate. The message was brief but polite, thanking Kate for her understanding. Many within the palace interpreted the gesture as a quiet acknowledgement that Meghan had crossed a line. The matter, they assumed, was settled. It wasn't. In the weeks following the wedding, staff expected tensions to ease. But behind the scenes, resentment lingered. Kate, emotionally bruised and frustrated by the lack of accountability, reportedly raised the issue during a private conversation with Prince William. William, already uneasy about the speed of Harry's relationship and Meghan's place in the royal structure, became even more concerned. The infamous Sandringham Summit, months later, would formalize the royal split, but its emotional origins, many now believe, trace back to that very dress fitting and the lasting damage it inflicted. Yet, when Meghan told Oprah in 2021 that Kate had made her cry, palace insiders were blindsided. One longtime staffer said, "It wasn't just a mischaracterization. It was an inversion of reality." Shock turned to outrage. The royal family, used to being misrepresented in the press, now found themselves misrepresented in a primetime broadcast reaching millions around the globe. Still, the palace didn't respond. The Queen's recollections may vary. Line in her official statement was widely seen as a mild rebuke, but it did not address Crygate directly. Behind the scenes, however, aides were preparing to challenge the narrative if it escalated further. Those plans were eventually shelved. The Queen's death, the coronation of King Charles, and other institutional priorities took precedence. But the resentment remained, and Kate, sources say, was left to privately grieve a public humiliation that had never been corrected. So why did she wait until now to speak? Two reasons, according to multiple well-placed sources. First, the Queen's passing marked a shift in protocol. With Charles ascending the throne and William taking on a more central role, Kate's position within the royal hierarchy became more secure. As Princess of Wales and future Queen consort, she had greater autonomy to speak, not recklessly, but carefully and deliberately. Second, the pressure to correct the record became too much to ignore. With public trust in the monarchy fluctuating, and with Meghan and Harry continuing to build a media empire partially based on victimhood, the palace recognized that allowing a false narrative to remain unchallenged would undermine the institution's long-term credibility. And so, with quiet coordination and a tightly controlled media rollout, Kate's version of the event was finally made public. The statement was not bombastic. It didn't accuse. It didn't attack. But it was clear, concise, and calmly devastating. "She knows her words carry power," said one royal correspondent who has followed Kate's career since her engagement to Prince William. "She didn't need to shout. She just needed to say it clearly, and the silence that followed was its own kind of justice." The aftermath has been swift. Sources within the palace confirmed that Meghan has not contacted Kate privately in response to the statement, nor has there been any official rebuttal from the Sussex camp. Some believe they are strategizing behind the scenes, weighing whether a counter-statement would cause more damage than good. Others think Meghan will ride it out, hoping the media cycle moves on. But for Kate, the damage has already been done, and the healing is only just beginning. The reality behind the palace walls is one of broken trust. Meghan's alleged manipulation of the Crygate narrative has not only wounded Kate emotionally, but has caused deep institutional concern about how the Sussexes handle truth. Royal sources now speak openly, if carefully, about the need for information integrity and measured transparency moving forward. Behind these terms is a growing fear that unchecked personal storytelling could corrode centuries-old traditions meant to preserve discretion and dignity. At the heart of it all lies one undeniable truth. Crygate wasn't just about tears. It was about who controls the story, who gets believed, who has the power to shape public sympathy. Meghan seized that power with a masterful narrative. Now, Kate has reclaimed it, not with drama, but with facts. Not with fury, but with quiet strength. For a woman raised outside the royal fold and thrust into the spotlight as the future queen, Catherine Middleton's most defining quality has been her silence. Over the years, that silence has become her armor, her strategy, and her strength. Through scandals, family crises, and relentless media scrutiny, she has held her tongue while the world filled the gaps with speculation. Yet now, in the wake of Meghan Markle's claims and the unfolding Crygate controversy, that silence has been broken. The question now haunting the public imagination is, why? Why did Kate Middleton remain silent for nearly 3 years as the world believed she made another woman cry? Why didn't she correct the record sooner, especially when the misinformation so drastically altered public perception of her character? To understand her decision to finally speak out, one must first understand the code of silence that binds the royal family. For centuries, discretion was the currency of monarchy. Royals didn't argue in public. They didn't respond to rumors. They didn't show vulnerability, at least not in ways that could be interpreted as weakness or rebellion. Queen Elizabeth II perfected this model with a policy that came to define an era. Never complain. Never explain. Kate, entering royal life in the shadow of Diana and under the watchful gaze of a cautious institution, embraced this code fully. From the moment her relationship with Prince William became public, she was instructed, explicitly and implicitly, that her power would come from restraint. The monarchy needed calm after decades of scandal. Catherine provided that in abundance. But the Crygate claim marked a turning point. According to insiders, when Meghan Markle first shared her version of the wedding incident during the Oprah interview in 2021, Kate was stunned, not by the fact that Meghan brought up the incident, but by how she reversed it. It wasn't just a twist of events. It was, in Kate's view, a distortion of the truth that painted her not as someone who had been hurt, but as someone who had caused pain. She was devastated, one palace aide disclosed. She felt completely betrayed. Not only had Meghan used a personal moment for global sympathy, but she had flipped the narrative and made Kate the villain in a story where she had tried, in her own way, to offer grace. Even so, Kate didn't respond. The Queen's advisors made it clear. Any comment would escalate the crisis. The royal family was still absorbing the impact of the interview, which included allegations of racism, neglect, and emotional abandonment. Crygate, they reasoned, was just one thread in a much larger tapestry of grievances. To respond to one part would draw attention to all parts. Silence was the safest path. Kate agreed. But the silence, insiders say, came at a cost. Privately, Kate struggled. Though she continued with public engagements, visiting schools, opening hospitals, supporting mental health initiatives, those close to her say she felt the weight of injustice bearing down with each photo op. Her approval ratings dipped in the weeks following the Oprah interview, not dramatically, but noticeably. The smile she wore for the cameras became harder to summon, and the pressure of playing the unbothered Duchess, while the world dissected a lie, took its toll. She didn't want to be a martyr, said a friend of the family. But she also didn't want to be misrepresented. She had built a decade of goodwill. Then in one interview, one sentence, all of that was called into question. Kate's breaking point didn't come all at once. It arrived in fragments, over time, through private conversations with William, through letters exchanged with senior aides, and through moments of quiet frustration where she asked again and again, when will the truth matter? The tipping point, according to multiple sources, came in early 2024 during a private meeting between Kate, Prince William, and King Charles III. The family was conducting what one insider described as a narrative audit. A review of ongoing public perceptions, media trends, and areas of reputational risk. Crygate was listed as a persistent concern, not because the monarchy feared scandal, but because Meghan's version of events had hardened into accepted truth. William, long a supporter of the traditional don't engage model, reportedly changed his stance during that meeting. He believed his wife had been unfairly targeted, that a false narrative had overshadowed her integrity, and that with the Queen gone, the family could no longer afford to let lies live unanswered. Charles, while initially hesitant, agreed in principle. And so, for the first time, a strategy to correct the record was drafted. The plan was to let Kate speak, not through confrontation or tabloid rebuttals, but through a controlled, respectful disclosure. Timing was crucial. It couldn't coincide with major royal events or look retaliatory. It had to feel natural, organic, and unforced. Over several weeks, drafts were prepared. Advisors debated tone, delivery method, and scope. Should Kate speak through a national newspaper? A TV documentary? A personal essay? Eventually, the palace settled on a hybrid approach, a televised conversation with a respected broadcaster and a written editorial to accompany it. The tone would be reflective, not accusatory. The goal was not vengeance, it was clarity. When the moment arrived, Kate was ready. Sitting in a private room, her voice calm but unwavering, she recounted her version of the dress fitting. She did not name Meghan directly. She did not express bitterness. But her words carried unmistakable weight. I didn't want to speak about it, she said, because I believed protecting my family's dignity was more important than correcting the record. But I also believe in truth. And the truth is, I was the one in tears. Not because I'm fragile, but because I care. I care deeply about kindness, and that day, kindness was missing. In the accompanying article, she wrote of the emotional burden of silence, of choosing to walk through criticism without reply, of raising children while watching the world debate her character. I can forgive, she wrote, but I cannot let a lie become legacy. The impact was immediate. Within hours, headlines flipped. Kate speaks, they read. The truth behind the tears. Social media accounts that had once circulated memes mocking her coldness now reposted clips of her emotional grace. Royal experts called it one of the most poised, impactful statements made by any royal in the post-Diana era. More importantly, Kate's decision to speak out sent a signal. That silence, while noble, is not always sustainable. That sometimes, defending dignity means telling your story, not for sympathy, but for balance. And perhaps most tellingly, it marked a new phase of Kate's evolution, not just as a future queen consort, but as a public figure capable of shaping her own narrative. Until now, much of Kate's image had been sculpted by others, by photographers, by columnists, by courtiers. In breaking her silence, she took authorship. She reminded the public that beneath the perfectly tailored coats and careful smiles was a human being who had endured falsehood with patience and had finally reached the edge of endurance. The decision wasn't impulsive. It was deliberate. The words weren't sharp. They were precise. But they cut through years of noise. And the woman who once chose silence as a form of strength proved, at last, that speaking the truth can be even stronger. The monarchy has long survived on protocol, deference, and silence. But every so often, a moment arrives that shatters the surface calm, a moment that punctures the carefully curated facade and exposes the raw, beating truth underneath. For Catherine, Princess of Wales, that moment came when she finally stepped forward and corrected the narrative that had been weaponized against her for years. The moment she said, unequivocally, "I didn't make her cry. She made me cry." In royal history, there are few moments as powerful and fewer still as carefully measured. The method by which Kate delivered her statement was as important as the statement itself. According to insiders, it was the product of weeks of internal deliberation within the palace. After years of holding back, the question was no longer whether to speak, it was how. The royal family knew they could not afford theatrics. The objective was simple: credibility, dignity, clarity. The truth not as revenge, but as a necessary correction. Kate's team coordinated an exclusive sit-down with one of the UK's most respected journalists, someone trusted by the public, known for fairness and integrity, and unlikely to sensationalize the moment. The interview was filmed in a modest drawing room at Windsor, designed to visually reinforce Kate's accessibility and authenticity. There was no opulence, no over-rehearsed glamour. The goal was emotional truth, not spectacle. What unfolded was both shocking in its simplicity and monumental in its emotional impact. Kate began calmly, speaking first about the toll of being misunderstood, of carrying a label that wasn't hers, of watching the world define her in someone else's words. "For years, I've stayed silent, not because I didn't have something to say, but because I thought it was the right thing to do," she said. "I believed my actions would speak for themselves. I believed time would clarify what needed to be understood. But in this case, time only deepened the confusion." She then described, with measured detail, what really happened in the days leading up to the wedding. She acknowledged the stress of the preparations, the emotional temperature of the moment, and the weight of expectation on everyone involved. But she also described an encounter with Meghan that was, in her words, cutting, curt, and completely unexpected. "She was under pressure, I know that. We all were," Kate said. But the way she spoke to people that day, it wasn't just upsetting. It was shocking. And when I tried to intervene, to offer some calm, I was the one who ended up in tears. Kate said she went home that night shaken, holding back her emotions until she was alone. She described sitting in her bedroom, still wearing the dress she'd worn for the fitting, quietly crying while William sat beside her in silence. "It wasn't about the dress," she said. "It was about how I was made to feel, dismissed, disregarded, and humiliated in front of staff I've worked with and trusted for years." The interviewer asked directly, "Did Meghan apologize?" Kate nodded slightly. "She sent flowers. A note. I appreciated the gesture. But that's not what I needed. What I needed was accountability. What I needed was for the truth not to be twisted 2 years later in a televised interview seen by millions." It was in that moment the tone shifted from reflection to quiet power. Kate wasn't just sharing her truth. She was reclaiming her story. She told the world, "I made her cry." Kate continued. "And I had to live with that lie, because I was told silence was more dignified than defense. But I don't believe that anymore. Not when the silence is used against you. Not when your children will one day Google your name and read things that aren't true." With that statement, Kate crossed a threshold no senior royal had crossed since Princess Diana gave her famous Panorama interview nearly 30 years earlier. But unlike Diana's interview, which was raw and emotional, and filled with explosive revelations. Kate's words were calm, composed, and devastating in their restraint. And she didn't stop there. Kate addressed the broader implications of the Crygate narrative, how it damaged her relationship with the public, how it sowed division within her own family, and how it created an atmosphere of mistrust that lingers even today. People don't understand what it's like to wake up and see yourself villainized on the front pages of newspapers for something that didn't happen, she said. To walk into a room and feel eyes judging you based on someone else's version of events. I've lived with that shadow for 3 years. The statement was accompanied by a written op-ed published simultaneously in The Times and The Telegraph, where Kate expanded on her motivation to speak now. There is a moment when silence becomes complicity, she wrote. And I've reached that moment. Not out of anger, not out of retaliation, but out of necessity. She concluded the piece with a line that has already become iconic. I did not make her cry, and I will not let that story be my legacy. The reaction was immediate and thunderous. Across Britain, across social media, across international press, Kate's revelation detonated like a royal shockwave. The same networks that once looped Meghan's Oprah interview now aired Kate's interview in full, with analysts poring over every word. Body language experts praised her composure. Psychologists applauded her restraint. Even critics who had long championed Meghan's side began to pause and reconsider. On Twitter, hashtags like #KateTellsTheTruth and #JusticeForKate trended for days. Influencers, journalists, and ordinary citizens expressed support. Some of the most emotional posts came from women who saw in Kate a reflection of themselves, women who had stayed quiet in the face of falsehoods, who had absorbed pain for the sake of peace. But the most striking response came from those who had previously been undecided. I didn't think I needed to hear from Kate, one prominent radio host said. But now that I have, my view of everything that's happened has changed. Among royal insiders, the impact was no less significant. One senior courtier described the statement as a recalibration of the balance of power. For years, Harry and Meghan's narrative had gone largely unchallenged. Their version of events shaped documentaries, memoirs, and millions of opinions. Now, for the first time, the royal family had countered, not with aggression, but with grace. Interestingly, Meghan and Harry issued no response. No press release. No rebuttal. No social media post. Some interpreted this as restraint. Others saw it as evidence that Kate's version was irrefutable. Inside the palace, the mood was said to be solemn but satisfied. It wasn't about scoring points, said one aide. It was about correcting the record. And it was long overdue. In the days that followed, commentators debated what the bombshell meant for the monarchy's future. Had Kate's statement marked a new era of transparency? Would more royals feel empowered to speak? Or was this a singular moment, born of personal pain and calculated necessity? Whatever the answer, one thing is certain, the Crygate story has changed. It is no longer a simple tale of one woman wronged by another. It is a mirror held up to the dangers of silence, the power of narrative, and the courage it takes to speak, not when it's easy, but when it's right. Within hours of Kate Middleton's emotional and unwavering statement clarifying her side of the now infamous Crygate incident, the ground beneath public opinion began to shift. What had been widely accepted as a settled narrative for more than 3 years, a story in which Meghan Markle had tearfully endured a cold and unforgiving royal sister-in-law, was now being actively re-examined, scrutinized, and in some circles, outright reversed. The silence that once served as a shield had been broken, and the response from the public was immediate, explosive, and deeply revealing. In the United Kingdom, the center of royal consciousness, the reaction was visceral. Major news outlets like the BBC, ITV, The Guardian, and the Daily Mail all led their digital editions with variants of the same theme. Kate finally speaks. Analysts rushed onto live broadcasts to dissect every sentence, every facial expression from her interview, every word of her written op-ed. Commentators who had previously given Meghan the benefit of the doubt suddenly found themselves asking, what if we got it wrong? Within hours, polling data started to trickle in. A Snap survey by YouGov showed that 61% of respondents believed Kate Middleton's version of events over Meghan Markle's. Perhaps even more tellingly, only 18% of those surveyed still firmly believed Meghan's original claim. The remaining 21% admitted to being unsure, evidence that minds were not just being changed, but opened. For many in the public, this wasn't just about one disagreement between two women. It was about trust, about who had earned it, and who had broken it. And now, with Kate stepping forward and laying bare her experience in an unmistakably human and dignified manner, there was a renewed sense of empathy for the woman who had, for years, suffered in silence. Across social media platforms, the shift was even more dramatic. On Twitter, now X, hashtags like hashtag Kate was right, hashtag Kate tells the truth, and hashtag believe Kate surged to the top of the trending list in both the UK and the US. Posts that once championed Meghan's bravery were now being juxtaposed with side-by-side clips, Meghan's confident demeanor during the Oprah interview next to Kate's emotional but composed delivery. Influential accounts that had previously backed Meghan started reposting Kate's statement, many with captions such as, "She held it in for years and still didn't attack. That's what real strength looks like." Instagram and TikTok were flooded with emotional reaction videos. Young women filmed themselves crying while watching Kate's words, sharing how her quiet dignity reminded them of their own experiences with false accusations or being misunderstood. Mental health advocates praised Kate for speaking up not with vengeance, but with self-respect. Even some American media figures, who had often leaned pro-Meghan in coverage, acknowledged the weight of what had occurred. Kate didn't have to speak, one major daytime talk show host said, but she did. And she did it with such restraint that it makes you want to go back and listen to everything with fresh ears. Meanwhile, newspapers that had previously criticized the British monarchy's handling of the Meghan fallout began running editorials calling for a broader re-examination of the Sussex narrative. In one scathing piece published by The Telegraph, the headline read, "The real victim of Crygate wasn't Meghan." The article went on to argue that Meghan had used a real emotional event, flipped it, and turned it into a tool for public sympathy, capitalizing on a moment that wasn't hers to claim. But this surge in sympathy for Kate was not just happening among media elites and political commentators. It was happening on the ground. In cafes, schools, and office break rooms across the country, the conversation had returned to a woman many people felt they had misjudged. "I always liked Kate," said one woman on the streets of Birmingham during a televised Man on the Street segment. "But I didn't realize how much strength it must have taken for her to stay quiet all that time. To hear her side now, it just feels like justice." A man in Manchester echoed the sentiment. "The royals aren't perfect. No one is. But Kate comes across as someone who respects the role. She took the hits and carried on. That deserves respect." The emotional undercurrent was not just about the story. It was about what the story represented. In a world where image is often curated and narratives are aggressively monetized, Kate's soft-spoken honesty stood out. She wasn't trying to sell anything. She wasn't launching a project, podcast, or production company. She was just setting the record straight. Even those who remained skeptical of the monarchy found something commendable in Kate's approach. "I don't like the institution," one university student said during a BBC call-in program. "But I like how she handled this. That kind of grace under pressure. You don't fake that." Still, not everyone was ready to completely abandon Meghan. On platforms like Reddit and Tumblr, where Meghan retains a vocal base of supporters, some accused Kate of carefully timed PR strategy. They pointed to the lack of specific dates and details in Kate's statement and argued that the palace had finally decided to weaponize Kate's likability to discredit Meghan's truth-telling. "Let's not forget who has media power here," one user wrote. "Kate didn't speak for 3 years, and now she suddenly does, right when Meghan's public image is declining?" Others warned that the public was too quick to turn on Meghan, especially given the broader issues of race, class, and institutional loyalty that colored her entire experience within the monarchy. "It's possible both women cried," one tweet read. "Pain doesn't have to be exclusive. Maybe Meghan just misremembered, and Kate felt hurt too." But these views, while present, were in the minority. The larger wave of public reaction reflected a long-overdue acknowledgement of Kate's emotional experience. For the first time since the rift between the Sussexes and the rest of the royal family became public, Kate was not just a symbol of the firm or a passive bystander in the narrative. She was a participant with her own voice, her own truth, and her own emotional stakes. In the following days, British politicians were asked about the interview. While most avoided commenting directly, a few spoke candidly. "Kate Middleton has conducted herself with exceptional dignity," said one member of Parliament. The public response speaks for itself. People recognize sincerity when they see it. Within the palace, the mood was reportedly one of quiet vindication. Senior aides, many of whom had pushed for Kate to remain silent over the past 3 years, were said to be stunned by the response. One insider told the Sunday Times, "We knew it would matter. We didn't realize it would matter this much." As support for Kate surged, several of her long-standing charity partners publicly expressed admiration. Heads Together, the mental health initiative she co-founded with William and Harry, issued a statement praising her courage and her message about the importance of honesty, emotional clarity, and resilience in the face of public misunderstanding. Perhaps the most remarkable shift was seen in American public opinion. A new poll conducted by Morning Consult showed a 12-point jump in Kate's favorability among U.S. respondents following her statement. Meghan, by contrast, saw a 7-point dip. While still popular in certain American circles, particularly progressive and entertainment-focused audiences, Meghan's once unshakable support appeared, for the first time, to be vulnerable. Royal historians began to comment that Kate had achieved something remarkable. She had turned the narrative tide without resorting to counterattacks or sensationalism. By speaking softly, she had spoken powerfully. And by speaking late, she had revealed the cost of carrying someone else's lie. This section of the story doesn't end with cheering crowds or public apologies. Meghan has yet to respond. The Sussexes remain silent. But in a battle of narratives, Kate Middleton has accomplished something rare. She has reset the scales. And as the public begins to digest this new reality, the questions linger: what else might have been misrepresented? What other truths are waiting to be told? And if Kate's voice could undo so much with so few words, what might happen if the palace chooses to speak again? As the world absorbed Kate Middleton's bombshell revelation, asserting, at long last, that it was Meghan who made her cry, not the other way around, the ripple effects quickly turned into waves. And with those waves came the inevitable undertow, a sharp and immediate backlash against Meghan Markle. It wasn't simply a public correction of a single story. It was the collapse of a foundational pillar in the narrative that Meghan had shared with the world. For many, it raised uncomfortable questions. For others, it confirmed long-held suspicions. But for Meghan, it marked the beginning of what some are now calling the most serious reputational crisis she has faced since stepping onto the global stage. The backlash didn't unfold as a singular event. It happened in layers, first on social media, then in traditional media outlets, then within the broader public consciousness. The tipping point wasn't just the content of Kate's statement. It was the manner in which she delivered it. Calm, honest, unembellished. Meghan's account, once revered for its raw vulnerability, was now facing direct contradiction from a woman the world had watched quietly endure 3 years of whispered blame. It wasn't long before the internet turned its lens back onto Meghan, scrutinizing not just her Crygate claim, but the broader architecture of her personal narrative. Reddit threads exploded with side-by-side comparisons between Meghan's Oprah interview and Kate's recent interview. Users dissected tone, word choice, timing, and context. Why would Kate lie about this now? Years later, one post asked. She has nothing to gain, and Meghan had everything to gain by playing the victim. That sentiment echoed across thousands of comments. On X, formerly Twitter, users created viral threads detailing alleged inconsistencies in Meghan's stories over the years, from timelines about when she and Harry met to her knowledge of royal protocols. A common refrain emerged: if she lied about Crygate, what else did she twist? Influencers who had previously offered unconditional support to Meghan began to walk back their positions. One high-profile podcast host who had once praised Meghan's bravery during the Oprah interview released a statement: "It's not about choosing sides. It's about the truth. If what Kate says is true, and I believe her, it undermines so much of what Meghan used to build public sympathy." The press didn't hold back either. British tabloid headlines were predictably brutal. The Daily Mail ran a front-page story titled, "Tears of the Real Victim," featuring side-by-side images of a tearful Kate and a smiling Meghan. The Telegraph, more restrained in tone but no less clear in implication, ran an editorial that opened with, "This is the moment Meghan Markle's credibility began to unravel." The Guardian took a more analytical approach, publishing a long-form piece titled, "When Truth Collides with Perception," which questioned whether the world had been too quick to canonize Meghan's account without scrutiny. Meghan came with receipts, the piece noted, but Kate came with restraint, and in that restraint, many found credibility. Perhaps the most damning blow came in the form of resurfaced interviews from Meghan's own past. A 2019 interview with a South African magazine in which Meghan described herself as an easy scapegoat for the firm was suddenly reframed. Was she really scapegoated? Asked a segment on GB News. Or did she weaponize victimhood to shape her brand? Even some members of the U.S. media, who had once given Meghan largely favorable coverage, began to shift their tone. On a CNN panel, A commentator questioned the foundation of Meghan and Harry's Netflix series. So much of their brand is built around being mistreated. If key moments in that narrative are disproven, what are we left with? A PR campaign dressed as a memoir. Celebrity culture responded in kind. While some A-list figures remained silent, others subtly distanced themselves. One well-known actress who had publicly defended Meghan on multiple occasions unfollowed her on social media, an act that did not go unnoticed by fans or tabloids. Media outlets began revisiting red carpet interviews, noticing how mentions of Meghan now elicited cautious answers, often vague and non-committal. Public trust, once buoyed by emotion and activism, was now tinged with skepticism. But the backlash wasn't only external. Inside the Sussex camp, according to insiders, there was growing unease. Those close to Meghan reportedly described her as stunned by Kate's statement. One unnamed source told a Los Angeles magazine she didn't think Kate would ever speak. She thought that door was closed. This changes everything. Another source claimed that Meghan felt ambushed and betrayed, believing that any narrative correction would come from the palace institution, not directly from Kate herself. There was immediate speculation about whether Meghan would issue a rebuttal. Some expected a video message. Others assumed a carefully worded statement would be released through Archwell. Yet, days passed, and nothing came. The silence was deafening. PR analysts debated the decision. If she responds, she risks escalating the conflict, one crisis manager explained. But if she stays silent, it looks like an admission. Either way, her public image takes a hit. And the consequences were already manifesting. A report from a Hollywood talent agency revealed that several potential commercial deals linked to Meghan's brand had recently been paused or reevaluated. One major publishing firm, rumored to be in talks for a follow-up to Meghan's children's book, quietly removed any mention of the project from their upcoming slate. Netflix, which had previously championed the Sussexes' content, reportedly held internal discussions about pivoting away from any future material that focused exclusively on personal royal drama. In charitable circles, too, Meghan's standing was under review. Several advocacy groups with ties to her Archwell Foundation faced mounting pressure to reevaluate their associations. One partner charity spokesperson noted, "We support survivors and truth-telling. Any ambiguity on either front is a risk to our mission." Meanwhile, Archwell's own platforms saw a dip in engagement. Website traffic dropped by nearly 25% in the week following Kate's statement. Social media posts from the foundation received fewer likes, comments, and shares, an unusual shift for a brand that had, until now, enjoyed robust digital support. What made the backlash more damaging than previous controversies was its credibility. Kate wasn't a tabloid writer. She wasn't a palace anonymous source. She was Kate, the one woman who had chosen silence, diplomacy, and loyalty until the lie became too heavy to carry. For Meghan, the challenge now was not just image repair, it was regaining trust. And trust, once broken on a personal matter as intimate as this, is nearly impossible to reclaim through press releases or video montages. Still, not everyone turned against her. Activist groups in the US and Canada warned against dismissing Meghan too quickly. "We must be careful not to silence women who speak out," one commentator argued. Even if Meghan's memory of the event differs from Kate's, it doesn't automatically make her malicious. But this nuance struggled to gain traction in a climate that now demanded clarity over compassion. Back in the UK, public sentiment was shifting in real time. Polls conducted 1 week after Kate's statement showed Meghan's favorability ratings had dropped by 11%, the steepest decline since the height of royal tensions in 2021. Among older Britons, the drop was even sharper. Among younger audiences, the gap between pro-Meghan and pro-Kate had narrowed considerably. Royal analysts began questioning whether Meghan's long-term brand would survive the damage. "You can recover from being disliked," one expert said. "You can't recover from being distrusted." As the dust continued to settle, it was clear this was more than a scandal. It was a reckoning. For Meghan, it was a reminder that authenticity isn't just about tears and vulnerability, it's about truth. For the public, it was a lesson in patience, in waiting for all sides before casting judgment. And for the monarchy, it was a reaffirmation that silence is not always the best strategy. The dispute between Kate Middleton and Meghan Markle over who made whom cry might, at first glance, seem like a minor footnote in royal history, a small, personal disagreement elevated by the press for dramatic effect. But beneath the surface, Crygate became something far larger. It evolved into a cultural weapon, wielded by both supporters and detractors to wage ideological battles far beyond the boundaries of Kensington Palace. To fully grasp the impact of Crygate, one must understand that it was never just about tears. It was about power, race, tradition, feminism, media manipulation, and who gets to own the narrative. It was a singular moment that reflected much broader tensions in British society and within the global public's perception of modern royalty. It was, in essence, the emotional proxy war for competing visions of the monarchy and its place in the 21st century. When Meghan sat down with Oprah Winfrey in March 2021 and delivered the line, calm, measured, and heavy with implication, that Kate made me cry, she wasn't simply recounting a moment of pre-wedding tension. She was anchoring her wider narrative of victimhood and isolation inside the royal family. That moment became a symbol of what she said she endured: cruelty, silence, and abandonment. But it wasn't just the sentence, it was the setting. It was how she said it, the lighting, the cinematic pauses, the timing. It came during an interview broadcast to millions, days after Prince Philip had been hospitalized, and during the height of global tensions around mental health and racial equity. That context amplified every word. The audience wasn't just listening to Meghan, they were hearing their own struggles echoed in hers. For her supporters, the Crygate anecdote encapsulated everything they feared about the monarchy: coldness, elitism, rigidity, and emotional repression. Kate, rightly or wrongly, became a stand-in for the old guard. She was traditional, stoic, and reserved, the polished and silent pillar of a monarchy that appeared unyielding and unsympathetic. Meghan, by contrast, was positioned as modern, open, and emotionally honest. To those who supported her, Meghan wasn't just speaking for herself, she was speaking for every woman who had ever been minimized, misunderstood, or mistreated in a system built to protect power, not people. Crygate was, in many ways, the emotional climax of the Oprah interview. It was the moment that pulled focus away from vague allegations and into a tangible story, one that viewers could visualize. Two women, a wedding, a moment of tension, one left in tears. And from that moment onward, media outlets, influencers, and everyday observers used that story to take sides. In Britain, the media was sharply divided. Left-leaning publications like The Guardian and The Independent tended to view Meghan's account as plausible, even damning, while tabloids like The Sun and the Daily Mail bristled at what they saw as calculated victimhood. Morning TV hosts clashed live on air. Piers Morgan famously stormed off Good Morning Britain after being criticized for challenging Meghan's claims. On social media, Crygate was weaponized with ferocity. On Twitter, memes ridiculing Kate as cold and jealous flooded the platform. Hashtags like #KateMadeMeCry trended alongside emotional testimonials from women who felt seen in Meghan's story. Crygate became shorthand for emotional abuse in hierarchical systems. It didn't matter whether it was true. What mattered was that it felt true to those who had lived through similar moments in their own lives. But for every woman who saw herself in Meghan, there were just as many who saw themselves in Kate. Women who had kept silent while being blamed, who had endured emotional injuries behind closed doors but were told to carry on, to be the bigger person, to not make it worse. For them, Crygate wasn't a story of emotional honesty. It was a case study in narrative hijacking. As months passed, the Crygate moment was repeatedly referenced in articles, books, and YouTube essays about the royal feud. It became a hinge point. The anecdote that justified the Sussexes' departure and painted the palace as emotionally bankrupt. It gave form to an otherwise abstract claim that Meghan had been treated with cruelty. But when Kate spoke out and reversed the narrative, the cultural weapon turned back toward Meghan. Now, the very people who had believed her saw their own trust as manipulated. The shift wasn't just about who cried. It was about who had used emotion as leverage and whether that was fair. Meghan had, intentionally or not, tapped into a powerful cultural moment. In the post-#MeToo era, the world had become more attuned to female pain and the legitimacy of emotional trauma. For too long, women had been told to keep quiet, to suck it up, to smile and endure. Meghan's tearful revelations felt like a breakthrough, a royal finally telling the truth about what goes on behind the palace walls. But Kate's revelation reinserted an old complication into the new narrative. The reality that women can weaponize emotion, too. That sympathy can be earned dishonestly. That a carefully curated story, delivered at the right moment, can be more powerful than facts. And so Crygate transformed again, this time into a cautionary tale, not just about belief, but about discernment, about the danger of assigning moral superiority based on tone, tears, or timing. It became clear that, in the digital age, whoever speaks first and loudest often wins the narrative war, at least temporarily. The broader cultural consequence of Crygate's weaponization was its role in widening the ideological divide around the monarchy itself. For Republicans and critics of the royal family, Meghan's version of the incident supported their thesis that the monarchy is outdated, emotionally toxic, and fundamentally unfit for modern values. For royalists and defenders of the institution, Kate's silence and grace, even while being vilified, was proof of the dignity the monarchy still embodied. Crygate became a litmus test for one's political and cultural alignment. To believe Meghan was to reject tradition in favor of transparency. To believe Kate was to defend restraint and grace over spectacle and self-promotion. And yet, the tragedy of Crygate was that at its core were two human beings, two women, trapped in a palace of perception. Kate never wanted to be the symbol of stoicism any more than Meghan wanted to be the face of rebellion.